Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us again for Inside Out, exploring the roads to redemption. I'm your co host, Dr. Lawrence Henry, and I am the proud owner of A Bridge to Light, where we focus on disrupting the school to prison pipeline and facilitating a more ease of reentry to our formerly incarcerated persons. And I'm joined today by my co host, our brother, our friend, Mr. Thomas Cotton.
Hey, everybody. My name's Thomas Cotton. I'm the founder and CEO of Redemption and Advancement Alliance, where our mission is to disrupt the cycles of incarceration. And we do that by helping the most important part of the process, the person. The person is better, everything else is better. Welcome to our show.
Excellent, excellent, Thomas. And again, we are here to explore the roads to redemption for the justice impacted person and the obstacles which sometimes has an effect on their progress, on their reentry into society. And as I mentioned earlier, you have done such a wonderful job of liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast. And most importantly, engaging so we can learn, we could be more informed on how you see the show. So please like, share, subscribe, and engage. So tonight's show, yes, sir. Yes, sir. We truly appreciate that. For tonight's show, we're going to look at contagious and chronic diseases that many justice impacted persons are affected by. And Thomas, if you could take us further in the show, that would be appreciated, sir.
Yeah. So when we think about the contagious and chronic and contagious diseases, we start thinking about healthcare. We start thinking about our health, and we think that those people over there are the sickest ones. And when we think about justice involved care, though, you know, we started this podcast because we're both graduates of Morehouse School of Medicine. We went through the Justice Involved Care program. Yes, and so as we start to think about the justice involved care aspect of helping those who are justice impacted, the chronic and contagious diseases are highly in place or they're impacted by them highly because we know that they have a lot of challenges before prison. And yes, coming out of prison, there's many other challenges that they have. So as we begin to walk through this process, we want to understand what chronic and contagious diseases are and how they impact the justice impacted person. We don't want to look at this as criminal justice. We want to look at people who have determinants of health that influence them in certain lifestyles and what can be done to support them to overcome some of these barriers.
Excellent, excellent. We want to look at the individual, how these chronic and contagious diseases affect the individual. How does it affect their family once they get out? Because the majority of them will get out. So how does it affect their family, their community, and the society? So it's not just a them problem. It's a us problem. It's a us solution. So we must drive to facilitate and identify sustainable solutions, which we'll speak to in another show with respect to chronic and contagious diseases. And those chronic diseases are, not limited to hypertension, cancer, bronchitis, and so forth. And Thomas, can you speak more to that based on your experience, sir?
Absolutely. You know, there's diabetes, there's hypertension, as you mentioned. There's a lot of different chronic diseases that we think about. And we usually associate them with people who are older or people who eat wrong, or we don't really think about the general population or the incarcerated population and how this impacts them. And then when we talk about contagious diseases, we don't think about the sexually transmitted diseases and different disorders that they have, like we can talk about COVID in prisons, but we're not going to get that deep because that's another show in itself. But tuberculosis and different other contagious diseases that are out there, these impact and influence people in such a way that they want to live healthy. But when you're in an environment that breeds these type of chronic diseases and contagious diseases, it's hard to overcome that. The other aspect of it, we don't talk about the mental health behind all this,
Absolutely.
because when you're impacted by these diseases, there's a lot of trauma that takes place. So a person that is impacted by the justice system not only has these environmental diseases that they're faced with, but now if they're incarcerated, they have to walk through the trauma of going through the incarceration process,
Yes, sir.
being away from their family, and also dealing with these health needs. So that impacts their mental health, their physical health. How many times have we heard, and I'm just going to say women because I've never done it, but I've heard women say this, when they get upset or something happens, I'm just going to get me a half gallon of ice cream and I'm going to eat my sorrows away, right?
Mm.
Men do that too, but I use the half gallon ice cream because we just go for the big old burgers and everything else.
Yes, sir.
But people that are incarcerated also have a lot of sorrow they want to eat away. So
Yes, sir.
that it impacts them with their diabetes, it impacts them with other chronic issues. And so we want to think about this in that standpoint of a person who's going through some traumatic events
Yes, sir.
and how this can really, if they didn't have these chronic diseases already, how this can impact them to where this becomes an issue. But studies have shown that when people already come out of these communities, that they going into prison exacerbates the chronic disease. It makes it adds additional obstacles for the offender to overcome. And when you talk about the healthcare system in prison, it makes it hard for them to maintain or even improve their health.
Yes. Yes. I tell you, you speaking of some of the obstacles and just getting back specifically looking at the chronic piece, what exacerbates, as you mentioned before, what exacerbates just some of the issues coming with chronic illnesses is just overcrowded. They're overcrowded,
Yeah.
and just the criminalization of the homeless and the criminalization of mental illness adds to that overcrowdedness, and sometimes with that population come chronic illnesses. And when we have reduced budgets and reduced staffs to speak to specific chronic illnesses, that's what exacerbates the illnesses which resides in the marginalized of the marginalized.
Yes.
And when we're also speaking about that overcrowded piece, that's a perfect environment to invite the contagious diseases to not only affect the justice impacted, but affect the staff that is there to facilitate the governing and support of those individuals.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead.
Yes,
Finish
sir.
up.
So looking at hepatitis, as you mentioned before, COVID, which is another issue, AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases, the overcrowdedness of some of our facilities invite the spread of diseases and the exacerbation. Also, many experts will argue with me on this, but the contagious disease of violence
Right.
when the environment is so dense and it is so overpopulated, you have various forms of violence, not only physical violence, but the emotional violence, psychological violence, structural violence, cultural violence, sexual violence. So there's many forms of violence that are taking place between the justice impacted community and between the justice impacted community and the persons who are there to provide support.
Yeah. There's two things I want to touch on that you brought up. The overcrowding, first of all. Overcrowding, whenever something's overcrowded, it limits resources. It
Yes.
also overwhelms the people that are responsible for these resources. So, as much as we can say about the staff within prisons and even the medical staff and the things that they need to do and what they're required to do and their policies and procedures, when you overwhelm a staff or an area, it becomes too much to handle. Think about schools. When our schools are overcrowded, teachers aren't functioning at their best. The resources aren't being distributed the way they need to be distributed. And so that's why we complain so much about overcrowding in our elementary and junior high schools and high schools, because we know that if you don't have the proper proportion of people to students or teachers to students, then
Sure.
it becomes a bigger issue. Well, it's the same thing for a prison. If you don't have, if you have overcrowding in prisons and nothing's being done about it, then when medical comes around, they're not really caring about everybody because there's so many people to care about. And then, you know, you have limited staff when it comes to the COs and their correctional officers. And so, as the correctional officers, you know, they're just trying to do their time, get back home to their family. A lot of this stuff becomes overwhelming. So, you know, there's going to be corners that are cut in there.
Sure.
The other thing about the transmission of diseases, one of the areas that we need to identify also is the drug use.
Mm.
Um,
Yes, sir.
People forget that inside prisons, prison is a different world. It's a world on its own, but it has a lot of the features that you see in the free world. And
Yes.
so getting drugs into a prison, it happens. How does it happen? I don't know. Different prisons, different ways, right? But there's heroin use. And so do you think that the heroin users in there are using the same needles as the other person, or they have these clean and sanitary needles in prison? They're probably using the same stuff. And so when you start thinking about passing of diseases, there's these bloodborne diseases that are passed around. And so in prisons, people do get raped. And so there's diseases that are passed that way.
Yes.
There's many different things that in a prison that you'll see on outside world and the inside world. There's similarities. They're just it's different. There's not the protections that you can have inside that you can have outside.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You know, just speaking about the relationship between overcrowdedness, chronic diseases, contagious diseases, and the staff's ability and or desire at times to perform certain functions. You and I have had a discussion previously about sometimes there's loyalty issues
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to the staff persons.
Yeah.
The staff person that's with the medical community, who is a few within a security culture of prison, may be compelled to do things that is outside of their Hippocratic oath, which is to do no
Mm-hmm.
harm, to comply with the security culture of that environment,
Right.
which could facilitate exacerbating chronic illnesses and or contagious activity,
Yeah.
contagious disease.
When
Yes,
you
sir.
got to think about your safety
Yes,
or your
sir.
Hippocratic oath, which
Yes,
one you're gonna, you know, right here, right now, I have to make a choice between my safety and my Hippocratic oath. A lot of times people will choose safety. I mean,
yeah,
we're all human. Think about it. And a part of that is, um, what do I bring up? What are the bells and the sirens that I set off so that people can know that this is an issue here? Or do I just go about my normal behavior on a regular basis? You know, if
yeah,
I'm not, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You know, do I want to make this an issue? And a lot of times, you know, the medical staff, they do the best they can with what they have, but at the end of the day, everybody who walks through a prison door wants to go home if they're a part of the staff.
wow,
And so, I mean, but everybody who walks through a prison door wants to go home eventually, but daily, this is what they have to be faced with.
wow.
Um, yeah. One of the things I want to share though
Yes, sir.
is I want to think about when we start talking about chronic and contagious diseases. Um, when medical records help out quite a bit, you know, when it comes to understanding who you're serving and who you're supporting and how you're going to help them. Typically people who come into prisons haven't had physicals. They don't have medical records that follow them into prison. So there has to be this new way of getting diagnosed. And then so most people, all people go through a county jail first. And so if the county jail begins to do the diagnosis of your health and everything else, how deep do they go into that? Because they may think that you're only coming in for a moment. They don't think that you're going to spend years and years and years. And if you are, well, that's the next levels. That's their problem. And so you go in, you get a basic physical, making sure your blood pressure is right and all these other things. But every facility you move to, your medical record does not move with you.
Right.
And so it's a brand new process every single time. So if somebody was diagnosed in one area with a mental health um, challenge, and then they had medication for it, yeah, the medication will follow with you, but the notes behind that generally don't. You have to be re-diagnosed. And then those who go through a system and they have their healthcare stuff in place, whatever level it is, once they're released, that medical record does not release with you either. And so everything has to start all over again. You're given a prescription for 30 days, and within that 30 days, 30 to 60 days, depending on where you're at, within that time, you have to reestablish your health care and get re-diagnosed and make sure that you're going to continue on your medications or whatever it may be, whether it's for diabetes or any other chronic or infectious disease. Once that process happens, you would think that people would understand, okay, wait a minute, this person getting out of prison doesn't have health care. They have to go through the process of going to an emergency room or some other way. And that's not the proper way of getting your care back up to par. If you don't have the resources once you come out to get your health care back up to par, that whatever level of health care you were able to attain while you were locked up, you have to be able to sustain that once you're released. And that's sometimes a barrier right there.
Yes.
And then coming into the system, if you don't understand how to advocate for your own healthcare, the system inside will just give you the bare necessities, the bare minimums, and you have to learn to advocate for yourself. And that's a problem, because if I didn't advocate for my health before, or if I didn't see the importance before I got locked up, then once I'm going through my incarceration, how am I going to see this unless you come across some of the people who actually care and who can help you walk through this process? So that's another way of looking at chronic diseases and infectious diseases, how they're spread throughout incarceration, how they're not addressed while incarcerated, and how they can be exacerbated once released. And so it's important that we begin to see ways that we can look for solutions, and we'll talk about that later.
Excellent. Like, share, subscribe, and engage. Like, share, subscribe, and engage. This topic, there's not many platforms. There are not many platforms speaking to this level of detail with respect to disrupting the school to prison pipeline, facilitating reentry to those who are formerly incarcerated, identifying roads to redemption. There are not many podcasts doing that. We're doing that, and we thank you for viewing and for commenting. And Thomas, you mentioned something very, very key, which we'll get to in a future podcast. But how are we bridging? How are we bridging from initial intake, understanding who we're dealing with, understanding, as you mentioned in the previous podcast, that everyone's an island. Everyone's an island. It's not a one-stop shop. Everyone that's dealing with a chronic disease and or a contagious disease need to have specially tailored treatment to facilitate their reentry or their rehabilitation. So how do we facilitate the bridge from one facility to another, from another facility to another, and then ultimately, how do we facilitate his or her or their reentry seamlessly with medical records and treatment ready to engage life again with little to no problems? So again, you and I will talk about that in the future discussion, which I'm looking forward to doing. But I think this show we've covered a lot. We've covered a lot. We've covered chronic illnesses. We covered contagious illnesses. We covered the relationship that overcrowding has on chronic illnesses, contagious diseases, and the ability for staffs that are sometimes underfunded to provide services to those that are justice involved persons. So
Yeah.
with that, Thomas, do you have anything to say to our listening or viewers?
Yeah, just for our listening viewers, I want you to engage this conversation. I also hope that you can gain some empathy for people when you look at them and the crimes that they commit. People who commit crimes, do they deserve some type of consequence? More than likely, yes. But the type of things that drive them to criminal activity, the type of things that impact their lives prior to that, their healthcare needs. I think everybody has the right to healthcare, and the Health Organization, they agree with that. Everybody has a right to healthcare. If we look at what the World Health Organization says about healthcare for those who are justice involved, everybody has a right to it.
That's
But
right.
this country and the way we engage healthcare is different on so many different levels. So I hope that you engage this conversation from a standpoint of having empathy for those who are going through the system. And then as you engage this conversation, give us some ideas of what you think about the healthcare system for those who are just involved. And I know it might spill out into, well, I don't have healthcare myself. Well, you know what? Both and we're not either or. We're not at odds with each other. There are times where people who have never committed a crime have challenges with healthcare,
That's right.
and we understand that, and we must address that also. So let's get behind this and let's start the dialogue about how we can engage this topic.
Exactly. Remember that justice involved person, the individual, although they may be dealing with an issue, they're going to return, and their issue may affect their family, it may affect their community, it may affect our society. So what we do or fail to do will have an impact. So in closing, everyone and everything is a resource. It takes a network of progression to defeat a network of oppression. So let's make the net work.
And I always want you to remember that the people that we're working with are just that. They're people. So as long as a person has a heartbeat, there's an opportunity for redemption.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Peace.